Дим, Дим, вот этого попробуй.
Не резали?
Я ничего не делаю. Значит, надо ее как-то быстро подавать. Не знаю.
Сантиметр хотя бы, не важно. Раз. Два. Молодчик, мы уже сейчас будем спикером.
Ну хорошо, когда будете, я прям сразу иду.
Тут отодвинуто, я вставлю.
Так. Ребят, где еще один микрофон? Радио.
Я его отнесла.
Мы с этой стороны садимся от таблички, правильно? Hello.
Daniel Corn from McKinsey.
Lena Buina from Yandex.
Very comfortable chair.
I think Mikhail said he was going to speak Russian. This is both, I think. This is both.
English and Russian?
Yeah.
Fine. Yeah. Lena?
Да? Отлично.
There's one at the camp.
We going up?
So, I think he said that you'll be the first, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Боря, дойди ко мне.
Он
Подойди, да.
It's always good.
Все готово?
Готовы мы, да?
Thank you. Thank you.
Готовы? Мы ждем команду.
Just waiting for the command to start our session from the video people, from the broadcasters. Distinguished guests of the forum, dear speakers and guests, welcome to our panel discussion. It's devoted to the following topic: transformation of tax and customs administration in digital economy, new challenges and opportunities. And before I introduce our distinguished speakers here, let's show a brief video. Fast development of digital technologies completely changed all spheres of our life, created new business models and digital ecosystems. Customs and tax authorities are adjusting to the new digital environment and are using these new opportunities to interact with taxpayers and those who are involved in foreign economic activity. In front of our eyes, a new digital ecosystem is being formed, which is improving fiscal transparency and decreasing admin load on business. Thanks to personal accounts and online services, customs services and tax services give business representatives an opportunity to remotely interact with authorities from any point in the world, and this is the most reliable access to centralized information about subjects and objects of administration. Terabytes of data are being stored and processed in the data processing center established under the auspices of the Ministry of Finance. The technology that's being used is based on cloud services, and virtualization of calculation capacity allows us to use technology of analyzing and processing big data, cloud computation, machine learning, AI, and Internet of Things. Special attention is paid to the implementation of the best practices into the state supervision systems. Federal tax service and federal customs service successfully using this unique centralized administration system with distributed access. It's been designed, and we have this tax administration system, AIS Nalog 3 or Tax 3. It processes income statements, reports, debt analysis, and many other different functions. We use new approaches in tax and customs administration. Thanks to this integration process, it's the foundation for forming the state-level system of managing our tax system. Also, for the we protect the members of the Eurasian Economic Community. We introduced this labeling system to control the cashless, the payment in cash. We have this special system, ASK KKT2, which controls the revenues of our organizations and sole proprietors. The Federal Customs Service has this unique system of HR management, which in real time provides analysis of customs clearance of goods and vehicles by the employees of the Customs Service. Federal Tax Services forming the unified register of the population containing information about all changes in their state or civil status, and the Ministry of Finance is launching a joint project between Federal Tax and Federal Customs Service to ensure traceability of goods made in or imported into the Eurasian Economic Community or Union at all stages of import, transportation, creating added value and consumption of goods in front of our eyes. Under the auspices of the Ministry of Finance, a unique administration system is being created for customs, tax and other non-tax payments. Within this system, all these processes are conducted according to unified standards and do not put an extra load on business. That was a relatively brief video for all of us to understand what we are going to discuss today. We're going to discuss tax and customs administration in digital economy, but first let me tell you what's the driver of this digitization and where we're all going. It's true about big companies, the government, tax and customs services. These are the so-called disruptive breakthrough technologies that are available to anyone. Voice recognition, special elements of your digital double of an individual or a company, AI, robotics, other technologies that 10 or 15 years ago were something from sci-fi fiction, and we are destroying stereotypes. And the Uber technology that was invented by a few guys, it almost completely killed traditional taxi services. Flows of information change, and we have the Internet of Things today. Today, non-structured information, and our colleagues will be presenting about how important it is to work with data, with information. All this information is everywhere. The one who will put all this information flow under the control first, who is able to use it in their strategy, will be more efficient, and that makes tax and customs service. I can add other authorities to this list. Federal service begins to look like a big company. On the one hand, you may ask what's common between them, but it's about transfer of data and focusing on technologies that change the world. Let me introduce to you our distinguished panelists this afternoon. Here we have guests who are the pioneers of these technologies, and they are well known for their knowledge of digital economy. David Regan from Accenture, Tom Fassner, Senior Director for Technology and Innovations from Teradata, Mr. Vladimir Bulavin, Head of the Federal Customs Service, John Dardo, Deputy Head of Chief Digital Officer, Australian Taxation Office, and we are cooperating them within the framework of OECD. Yelena Bulina, CEO of Yandex Russia, Peter Green from OECD, Tax Administration Secretariat, and Daniel Korn from McKinsey. We have representatives of other countries, Singapore, Denmark, Norway. Thank you all for joining us here at the Moscow Financial Forum. But before we start, I would ask David, whom I heard a lot about in the last 5 years. Let's ask him to share what's going on in the digital economy of the world, where we're all going.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you for the invitation to the forum. It's a privilege to speak here, and it's great to be able to work under the OECD with the auspices of with the Federal Tax Service in Russia. It's a very leading agency. I'm from Accenture. Accenture is a global technology and consulting company. It has about 400,000 employees. It has a value of about $110 billion. So it's a big company, and we work in many different sectors. My role in Accenture is to look after the work we do with tax administrations. So I focus on that particular domain and bringing the broader capabilities of technology to those particular clients of ours. So this is a very exciting time. It's exactly as the Commissioner describes. It's a little bit like science fiction has arrived. It's really interesting. It's a great time, so it is. In the past, as a technologist, I would have been constrained around data. I would have been constrained around storage. I would have been constrained around processing speed. Those issues have gone away, and we have a very different world in terms of what we can do as technologists now. The cloud has given us access to unbelievable amounts of processing power. We've lots and lots more data in our systems, and we've some very exciting new technologies taking advantage of those systems. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and blockchain are among those particular technologies. I'm going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and about blockchain. I had the privilege this morning of doing the Flight of Moscow, which was a great virtual reality demonstration in the park just beside us here, and it's a great example of the power of the new, exciting science fiction world we live in. So, if we look at artificial intelligence,
Искусственный интеллект.
what does it mean? It is a combination of different technologies, and ultimately what it does is it changes the way computers deal with the human being. It gives the computers the ability to deal with natural language. It gives the computers the ability to see, and it gives the computers the ability to hear and speak in a way that we didn't have previously. And those particular capabilities are brought about by many, many different aspects of technology: natural language processing, machine learning, and many others listed on the page there. What they mean for a tax agency, for businesses in general, is suddenly we can do things that weren't possible in terms of voice and speaking to the computer, as we do with Alexa, in terms of images and what we can see with the computer, as you see when you pass through a border and you see facial recognition, and in terms of documents and what we can read from documents and understand from text. It's just quite different from what it was in the past, and it changes the way we can process information and indeed perform duties in taxation and in customs. Blockchain is another technology which is very interesting. It's one which enables us to share data between people who don't necessarily trust one another. Where there isn't one owner of the data, there are many owners of the data. The data is distributed in many different places. And when you write something into that data record, it stays there. It remains. So it's basically a means of exchanging data between distrusting people who don't trust one another. It's got lots and lots of potential use cases. Its potential is still something that hasn't been realized. But it's one that is being explored by many, many avenues of business, including the tax agencies. Now, if we look at these technologies and what they might offer, let's consider it from the tax agency's perspective. And in one way, we can say this is just another set of technologies. But actually, when you examine them more closely, they cause and pose some very fundamental questions about the structure of the organizations as tax agencies, the way you engage with other players in the economy, and the actual way that you engage with the people in your organization and the capabilities and skills and ways of working they might work. The world has moved into a faster pace with these new technologies. I hope there's a video going to work next.
Revenue agency challenges are mounting. The need to reduce taxpayer errors and increase compliance has never been greater. At the same time, agencies face pressures to leverage digital technology to provide better services to the taxpayer. As these pressures converge, revenue agencies have both an urgent need and a significant opportunity. There no longer needs to be a direct tension between compliance and customer experience. Powerful trends are driving change in commercial sector customer engagement, and these can help agencies achieve game-changing outcomes. By re-examining how they engage with their taxpayers, agencies can reduce cost, improve voluntary compliance, and be more responsive to evolving taxpayer demands. The revenue agency of the future will transform how it engages with the taxpayer based on 5 key characteristics. changing how, where, why, and when agencies engage with taxpayers will have significant implications across their organizations. Agencies need to use design thinking and service design methods to define a taxpayer-centric vision of the future that aligns with its compliance ambitions. They then need to adopt an agile and iterative approach to build the interactive capabilities necessary to realize their visions. The impact on an agency will be substantial. Agency operations will change as customer interactions become more personalized and specific. The good news? The performance outcomes achieved will make this increasingly imperative journey worthwhile because more people are filing correctly and on time. The revenue agency of the future is being built today.
Okay, that was a little video introducing the way revenue agencies see technology. And as the Commissioner said, revenue agencies are already embracing technology. They already adopt it, and there are many examples of significant advances in technology adopted by agencies. Agencies are respected, and when we do our Accenture taxpayer survey, a global survey of taxpayers around the world, asking them their views of tax agencies, the views are pretty positive. People think tax agencies do a good job right around the world. That being said, when you ask the question, do you interact with the tax agency, the answers are more often than we would expect. Tax agencies have automated a lot, but still, most of the people, 3/4 of the citizens, in addition to their tax return, filing their annual tax return, also have 2 or 3 or at least 1 additional interaction with the tax agency every year. And they're expensive for the citizen and the tax agency, and they're a little frustrating because sometimes it's quite hard to connect with the tax agency. And the opportunity digital technologies offer us is how to change that, how to think differently about those contacts. We can think about contacts as being ones where people are looking to solve simple problems, and those simple problems are the ones which are most likely to be resolved by the technologies that we have today in terms of artificial intelligence, but that will change over time. So if we look at the application of bots, they can be used in different domains in the revenue space, and there are already examples. In Australia, you can register your voice with the agency, and it will identify you, and the next time you call, it knows who you are, and you don't need to prove who you are. In Ireland, a voice bot has gone live in the last few weeks, where you can talk to a bot, and you can get a tax clearance certificate online as you go. In France, artificial intelligence has been used to examine the maps of the country, looking for swimming pools which haven't been found or haven't been declared by the people living in those properties. Swimming pools are quite hard to identify as a machine, but artificial intelligence is clever enough to be able to recognize what a pool looks like, even with its many different shapes and dimensions. So that ability to speak and talk is something which is different to what was there previously, and it potentially changes the interaction from a tax agency perspective in terms of service and in terms of compliance. Personalization is the ability to move from an answer to a question online, which might be fairly standard, to one which is much more personal in your language, which recognizes your situation, which maybe even prompts you as to what to do next. And that ability to use data for personalization is a huge potential to remove contact. And then there's the really fundamental question of the ecosystem. How does the tax agency integrate with the rest of the economy? How does it connect? And how does it connect as easily as possible? And these technologies enable us to connect in much better ways, which will make it easier for the citizen and improve compliance. There are many, many different ways in which connection can happen. Within the supply chain, the tax or customs can be built directly within it. In terms of payments, payments can be captured as we go and given to the tax agency. In terms of identity, the possibility of sharing identity across government agencies and across banks and other institutions arises, and the many different technologies involved in identity enable us to think through, well, can we make that entire process easier? in terms of the whole industry of supporting taxation, the tax software providers, tax partners. How can we work with them more closely? For example, there's bots out there already which are used in the commercial world to provide advice to taxpayers. Well, shouldn't those bots also be used by the tax agency, because it's the self-same questions we're answering? Why don't we connect more in that regard? In the customs domain, blockchain has been examined as a way to deal with some of the challenges we have from an import and export perspective, particularly in areas where people might be doing something like trade finance, where there are multiple different parties, banks in different countries, importers and manufacturers, and customs all involved in sharing data so that money can be exchanged. The potential of blockchain in that domain is being explored. Obviously, the whole generation of digital platforms that are now emerging, as the Commissioner said, like Uber, they cause us to pause and reflect and say, well, how do we administer the tax system in that domain? How do we embed tax into the way in which they work so that we get a better result for the user of the service, the provider of the service, and the tax agency? So lots of new thinking to be done there, lots of areas to consider. And it becomes quite complex when you consider all of the different people that an agency must serve. It serves very large business, and it serves a student who has a vacation job, and everything in between. And the different ecosystems that we touched on there, they all have different requirements for different segments. So the challenge for the tax agencies is to say, how can I think at that level, at that segment level, and think through the digital world for that segment, so that particular digital world is maximized for the effectiveness of taxation for that segment, and also to improve the convenience for the citizen. So I'll close by saying we have an interesting challenge. From the tax agency's perspective, they're always interested in compliance. That is their job. And they want to make compliance easy. They want to make it a simple taxpayer experience. And the expectations of citizens are that the experience should be easy. Part of making it easy is actually to connect with a broader ecosystem of suppliers. And their interests are different. They want to promote their brand. They want to increase sales and income from their perspective. And the challenge for the agencies is to say, how can we create the dialogue and the structures which enable us all to work together to deliver a better result for ultimately the citizens and businesses of a country. A very exciting time, and thank you very much.
Спасибо. Спасибо, Дэвид. Да, спасибо. Вы знаете...
Thank you very much. You know, as part of this forum, we have organized a special session, also as part of the OECD project related to the transformation of tax authorities. And we have welcomed some of our colleagues here. And yesterday we talked with Teradata, we had some discussions. I looked at the presentation and I asked the representative of Teradata to be present in our panel, to participate in our panel, to discuss issues related to the digitization. And in fact, Teradata is a global producer of server platform, provider of server platform and database management system. But Teradata approach is a big data-driven, predictive analytic-driven approach that creates sensitive models that allow you to identify what happens with aliases, with both subject and object of a legal relationship. So I would like to ask Tom Fastner to say a few words about that, if I may.
So thank you very much for inviting me and trusting me here on your panel on such a short notice. So my name is Tom Fastner. I work with Teradata in Rancho Bernardo, San Diego, California. We are in the process of making this our headquarters, and we've been in the business of analytics for almost 40 years. Our total focus is on helping customers to use data to drive their business, to optimize their business, and to change actually industries. And today, I'm here, I'm representing the Technology and Innovation Office within Teradata, and I'm responsible for technical communication. And the reason I'm here, I was before with one of our largest customers, with eBay. And my boss, Oliver Ratzesberger, who is now Chief Operating Officer at Teradata, and his team also at eBay created a very interesting foundation of capabilities that actually led to the work I'm going to talk to you today about the sentient enterprise. Now, maybe I should call it sentient government, right? Because it applies exactly the same way, and it's a vision. It's a North Star on how to deal with digitalization, and some others call it Industry 4.0. And it's a blueprint. It provides you a blueprint with for technology agnostic, actually, capabilities to that are deemed critical for organizations to deal with the challenges that are coming at us in our ever faster changing world. So the idea of sentient enterprise was born a couple of years ago in an evening dinner between Oliver Rotzesberger, and it's based on his pragmatic experience with all the things we had to build for a very, very sophisticated leading-edge company, eBay. And Mohan Shani from the Kellogg School of Management, a strategist and a leading thinker of the industry, coming from the other perspective, looking and discussing what differentiates successful companies today. And the discussion went about what are the capabilities that actually enables those companies to make decisions at the speed of data. So our customers actually embrace the sentient enterprise story. Customers like Verizon, Dell, GM, Siemens, Wells Fargo, they love the story, and they are adopting the story and taking that to guide their business into the future. But you will hear and you will see, it also applies for the sentient government, right? Like we have here on the panel representatives from the tax services as well as from customs services here in Russia. And it applies to them exactly the same way. And we take that to our heart too. It's our strategy on how we want to run the business as Teradata, as a software company, to provide analytics capabilities in the future. So let me start with a little scenario, and you might have heard of scenarios like this before. So it's right before Q4 earnings call. The CFO is receiving the data about revenue and margins, and surprise, surprise, there's a 5% dip in revenue coming out of the blue. She calls an emergency meeting into the war room, and the analysts starting discussing. Actually, a lot of the analysts in that company don't even believe the numbers. They're questioning it. Some people come up with ideas, well, what could have gone wrong? Well, we had this storm in winter in Q1, so a year ago, basically, that actually caused some outages and unhappy customers and customers complaining and customers were leaving. Some others don't buy into that because people kept leaving throughout the summer, so it didn't have anything to do with the winter storm. And some people believe, well, maybe it's because the economy is going down, there's less discrete money for people to spend, so they're cutting down in expenses. Some others think, well, our competition is getting smarter and catching us. So big confusion in the room, and at the end of the day, no real decision being made and no conclusion made because they don't know any better and accept the fact that, well, this is a thing we have to deal in the future with, right? That's it. But that's just the tip of the iceberg today, and it's probably a common scenario across many corporations around the world that are not quite ready to even use the data they have today. But they have it coming big times. If you look at how fast technology is changing today, this is a graph of how fast technology is adopted. And let's take a look at phone, right? It took about 70 years for the telephone, the wired thing, to get a market penetration of 50%. Cell phones took only 28%, not percent, years, 27 years. And smartphone took only 17 years. So we are creating new technology and have to adopt new technology faster and faster. competition is coming out of nowhere. Automobiles have been around for over 100 years. And they got disrupted by Tesla Motors, who created a car that drives with electricity, a revolutionary concept. And along the way, they solve all the problems in regards to transportation and fueling the car and battery technology and solar, coming out of nowhere. We as consumers get used to the benefits of new technologies, and we get used to it really quick, and we don't want to give it up. We want to have everything in real time. So we are sharing also everything in real time. Like our kids are talking about where they are, what they like, what products they bought, what they like about the product, what they don't like about the product. They're building an opinion out there without your help. Now, a couple companies already caught up on this. And they are actually listening to what they are talking in the open channels. It's the first time they actually have direct feedback from their customers talking about the product, and product management can use that information to actually drive the development of those products. Self-service. Our technology, our bandwidth, our end-user devices became so powerful. We can have anything, anytime nowadays. I don't have to call anybody and wait in line. I can do it myself when I want it, and I can get an API to actually program around that too. Now, this will have dramatic changes into culture in the companies. Now, we have to accept the fact that actually innovation and thought leadership is coming from anywhere in the company, and maybe even from outside the company. It's not coming from only the center anymore. The time is changing. We are coming into an age of listening to data as it comes to us versus reaching out to a system and building an ETL process to bring the data to us. We are changing from top-down management demand and control system into a collaboration and an open and crowdsourcing kind of environment. Dramatic changes that will enable us as an organization to become sentient, to feel and to actually react and learn as a single organism. Like a kid that starts learning to walk and stumbles over a rock, it learns by itself, next time I better look for a rock. And the same way it should work for organizations. That's the sentient enterprise, the sentient government. Now there's identified 5 core capabilities to support a sentient enterprise. And they are numbered 1 through 5, but don't take this as a sequence. They are just therefore numbered for differentiation. So the first one is the Agile Data Platform. So that's a capability to enable everybody in the organization to have access to the data they need to do their job. And they can actually look at the data, they can play with the data, they can use it for their analysis, they can bring on their own data and compare and join to the data that exists in the corporation without creating hundreds and thousands of silos. They're all working on a shared infrastructure, and they can actually share the results, what they have, what they found, with other organizations. It's really the democratization of data and enabling everybody to base their work on data. The second one is now going beyond transactions into behavior, a behavior analytics platform. It's becoming more and more important to not only be able to count transactions, how much money did I make here? You also need to understand what the customer point of view is. What are all the considerations, all the touch points you had with your customers along the way between those transactions, so you actually can predict what the next transaction might be, when it will come. That will change the game. It will change the game from a technology perspective because your data goes up 100 times. And your algorithms are no longer just based on, let me count the transaction, let me sum up the money I made. it will actually have very complex algorithms for pattern detections, for path analysis, and how we interact with your customers in analyzing that. The third one is a collaboration platform, ideation collaboration platform. Now this is mostly focused around the bringing the people together. It's the LinkedIn, the Facebook, and the Twitter of analytics inside your company, right? You form a community that is able to interact with each other across corporate organizations. The fourth one now, so far we have built foundations, but we haven't done anything, we haven't created value. The value comes with applications. And we need to be faster with deploying applications. We want to concentrate the scarce resources of software development to create mini apps, like you are familiar with your cell phone. But then that will enable everybody in your corporation to use those apps and combine those apps in workflows to do their job. A simple example would be a conference like this, when you have people who are interested in your products, and you get the information from those. And why can't a marketing person upload the data into the system using an app, feeding that into another app to figure out, okay, who do we already know, who is already a customer, who we already know about, and who are new prospects. Then take the new prospects, feed that into a scoring engine to figure out what might they be interested in, what kind of products, what kind of services, and then use that information to feed that into the campaign tool to have the appropriate communication set up. The fifth one now deals with the fact that we end up with thousands of applications. Some of them are running on a daily basis, and whatever runs on a daily basis, it could be the data that the financial services are collecting here across the country with the transactions. You need to monitor if the application still works. Right? Do I receive as many records as I expected? Do I see the volume as I expected? Total, by region, by city, by vendor, you name it. So every application comes with the responsibility to actually make sure it works. So I need to look at the data today as a human being. But I look at very specific things. I know I'm trained to do that, and it's very cumbersome over time. That's all I will do. Not a very fun job to do. Let's machine do this, right? Let them actually figure out independently what the trends are, what the expectations are, how the data should look like every day, and alert the human beings if something goes out of order. So now if you take those capabilities, and we are now a sentient enterprise, how could the scenario work out for that telecommunication company in that crisis? Actually, there might never be that crisis. If you put those 5 capabilities to work, how does it look like? Well, let's go to stage number 4. We have an application deployed that is actually monitoring customer sentiment on the internet. It's deployed, it's running on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, and the stage number 5 has deployed a monitoring of that application, automatically identifying trends, and hey, now in Q1 we have a problem here. It will trigger and it will notify the analyst and saying, you need to look at this. The analyst will turn around, talk to the machine and say, hey, show me the data of leaving customers, cancel contracts by region, by area, just to explore the data, what's going on. He might then turn and decide, let me provision my sandbox and let me do some in-depth analysis of all those people who canceled our contract. What were the touch points before? Did they look at the internet at our terms and conditions? Did they call into the call center or on the online chat if they actually complained about about dropped calls and things like that, and do that path analysis and see what comes up? They can post it now in stage 3 on the ideation platform about their findings and asking for help from other organizations on how to deal with this situation. Now, other people will pick it up. And one of them actually might discover some chatter about a new discount from a competitor to actually that causes and has a nice correlation with the drop, the canceled contracts. So now that is sentient enterprise at work. It will actually make that line of this graph look very different. You will never see that big crisis because after a short period, you will pick up something is wrong and your organization gets engaged automatically, does the right things, converts and rescues the situations, and you will be happy to report good numbers in Q4.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Such general technological trends that were discussed here sometimes need practical examples of practical application. If we talk about how we interact within this unified fiscal authority that we are building together with the customs service, and let me try to rephrase what Tom was talking about and how the path that we followed. That's how we worked on building our integrated tax and non-tax payment administration. The first thing that we did, we analyzed using the flexible data platform our own business platforms as ours and that of the customs service. Then we moved from transactions to behavioral or predictive analytics when we understood what the taxpayer could do using the so-called gray schemes. Then we had that collaborative part where we exchanged risk assessments. After that, we came up with this analytical application. In particular, the tax authorities got the information about customs value from the customs authorities. And that's an entire system that checks all those chains of added value, making sure that everything is paid to the budget. And then we went to the platform of autonomous solutions, but having a very serious flexible platform of all main data, which became our serious asset. Why I'm telling you all this? Because I want to give the floor to Mr. Vladimir Bulavin, head of the Federal Customs Service, and together we did a lot of things in the last 2 years. Let me give you two examples. By getting a huge amount of data about the customs value when the goods are imported into Russia, we dealt with this correlation between the movement of goods and services and finances related to them, and did it very carefully using predictive analytics, behavioral mode of taxpayers. We can predict what could happen if those chains are not in compliance with money flows. And the second thing was integration of risk management system, which led to totally different efficacy of customs and tax administration. And today our customs service is up in the rating from, in these 2 years, in doing business, up by 70 positions. So Mr. Bulavin, please have the floor. Thank you, dear moderator, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, guests of the Financial Forum. I am sincerely thankful to our moderator for doing my job for me and telling you about our interaction with the Federal Tax Service. The digital technologies in the customs industry of the Russian Federation have been used not that long ago, but it's already in use. The first electronic declaration was submitted in 2008. In 2014, we have 100% electronic customs declarations or statements, and now we can say that we have digitized all customs regimes and procedures. Together with my colleagues who are present in this room, and many of you know them quite well, we started developing a new customs strategy for the year 2030. And originally, when we started discussing our approaches, we came to a logical conclusion that all we have to do to develop our customs service in the future has to do with the development of IT resources and communication systems. Currently, The Customs Service of the Russian Federation every year processes about 4.5 or to 5 million customs declarations, 12 or 15,000 declarations per day. You can imagine hundreds of fields and positions of goods, nomenclature. You have to receive all that, to assess all that, form requests to electronic resources of other agencies and ministries, and to our partners' resources abroad, or to information resources of certain companies, to assess all that, to identify risks, to minimize those risks. And it's obvious that to manage and analyze those big volumes of data, you need the corresponding architecture of your IT system. Currently, the Federal Customs Service employs 81 information systems and 67 information resources. Every day, this unified information automated system is generating about 30 million messages. 2,000 communication channels are in use. We interact with information resources of 32 federal agencies in the Russian Federation. We have active contacts with our partners abroad, and currently the Federal Customs Service has partnerships with 68 customs administrations all over the world. It's only natural that there is a question. Okay, we have all these companies that conduct foreign economic activities, and we have the government here involved, and what shall we all do? And the answer is in that main principle that we're using as we are developing: simplicity and comfort for business, efficiency and safety for the government. And there's a certain chapter in the program which is entitled 10 Steps Towards Business. And I have to say all these steps have been digitized. When we talk about the IT systems in general, we have to say that we want them to be reliable. That's our priority. Imagine that the nominal throughput capacity at a customs checkpoint is about 300 vehicles per day, up to 500 during the peak period. Imagine there's a disruption in the communication channels, in the software, in the hardware, and all of a sudden you close down customs processing for one day in the country. It would mean that automatically you would get a queue of 500 vehicles at the checkpoint. If it's summertime and they are carrying perishable goods, imagine the wave, the resonance that it will create among our businessmen and entrepreneurs. Of course, our task is to make sure that our IT systems work reliably. Currently, you may be aware of the fact that in the country we have received the new customs code, which is valid for the unified customs space. And according to that code, we get 4 hours for one customs declaration. In real life, thanks to our mature digital environment, for import, we get about an hour and 40 minutes, and for export, about 40 minutes. I believe that thanks to a well-developed IT system in general, we are able to automate many processes. In 8 months of this year, 35% of all declarations that we process are registered automatically. Average time for registration is 3 minutes. By 2020, according to our plans and our comprehensive program, we will lead the level of automated registration to 99%. We automated issuance of a declaration for the so-called green sector. If in 2017 we automated about 20% of our declarations, to be released for the sector in 8 months of this year, we're up by 5%, and currently 25% of declarations are released automatically without the participation of a customs officer within 5 minutes time. Let me refer to our plans in accordance with the comprehensive program. In 2020, we want to automatically release 80% of the declarations in this green sector. I hope that business will show compliance in the customs area, and the number of declarations submitted by the green sector by 2020 will also amount to 80%. In 2020, unless there are any significant changes, we'll be automatically releasing 64% of all submitted declaration forms. We are quite active as we interact with business, as we use our public advisory board. We also work on this personal account service. Currently, 150,000 companies use this personal account at our website, and every year we get about 80,000 businessmen who become our clients. They use their personal account there, and of course it has to be upgraded somehow, but we use these opportunities to get feedback from our companies about how we work, and we really listen carefully about their opinion, or what they have to say. There's this accumulated potential for the development of IT systems and resources allowed us this year to make the following step. In accordance with the program approved by the head of the government and president of the country, this year we started large-scale reforms of the entire customs service.
While up until now the country had 672 points of customs declaration. By the end of this year, we're going to aggregate them into 16 centers of electronic declaration, and we're going to set up 6 points of electronic customs declaration in federal centers, specialized centers of electronic declaration, excise customs, energy customs, and specialized centers, electronic declaration centers in the Kaliningrad district customs service, as well as in our port cities such as St. Petersburg, Novorossiysk, and Vladivostok. What's the value of that? Well, first of all, we are moving away from non-state areas, moving to state areas, and we are going to break the personal contact between the inspector, customs inspector, and the customer, the taxpayer, thereby decreasing corruption-related risks, increase the objectivity of decisions made, unify our approaches to decision-making, and also create the environment for increasing the potential of electronic customs, electronic declaration, and make further steps to expedite customs monitoring, customs regime, and so on. And speaking about the customs regime administration, I'd like to say a few words about the risks that play an important role in customs administration overall. Mikhail has already said that we have implemented a risk-oriented approach, just like in the Federal Trade Service. Thanks to the information service, we categorize custom fee payers on 300 parameters automatically. So the machine, the algorithm decides who's in the green and who's in the red. Thanks to this approach, overall, by looking at the statistics, I can say that we collected an extra 25 billion rubles, which went into the federal budget. And I'd like to say that the most sensitive procedures, the most sensitive for the business, such as the customs inspection, have been minimized. We only use those inspections in just over 1.5% of all the declarations. For those in the green, this percentage is even smaller, but overall it's just over 1.5%. So we have significantly reduced our load, the load we create on the business community, and I believe I should say a few words about our approaches to providing customs payments and all sorts of levies. We have a common account, so a declarant doesn't have to have multiple accounts. It's enough to have just one settlement account for each declarant in order to conduct all transactions with the customs service as part of providing declarations and paying all the relevant payments. I fully support Mikhail Mishustin specifically what he said, that that there needs to be a common mechanism of accepting tax and customs payments. Indeed, we already have quite close information cooperation. We provide information, all our declaration data periodically to the Federal Tax Service. We have been able to harmonize our approaches with regards to the categorization of the taxpayers and customs fee payers. Those in the red, by the definition of the Federal Tax Service, will never be in the green when it comes to paying customs fees. It's important to to say that this interaction does not only occur at the federal level, but also at the middle and the local level, between the inspectorates, both customs and tax inspectorates. And in the 8 months of this year alone, we have jointly conducted 390 joint inspections. We have been able to collect extra money, about 3 billion rubles. I know that this number can even be larger than that. We have opened administrative cases and criminal cases after we found violations. So this shows the results of our work. And the next goal that we have is to create a national commodity and goods monitoring system that would allow us to track down all those goods from the customs to the sale at retail stores. So we are going to create feedback loops, databases from which we can get the interesting data such as the price, country of origin, codes, and the quantity. I believe that this year we will be able to start an experiment, start the pilot stage of this project this year, and we'll be able to launch, although with a limited capability, launch this system. Of course, the possibilities that are given by digital technologies and that can be used in customs, of course, are not fully exhausted. I don't know if you've seen the pictures of inspection complexes. I think you should have a very good imagination and be very skilled professionally in order to see, to recognize what is in there, to recognize what's prohibited, what prohibited items are present in the picture, and so on. Of course, customs authorities of our country, not only of our country, would like to have an automatic system to be able to visually inspect and automatically determine if any prohibited items or controlled substance or items are present there. We need to expand our information cooperation with our foreign partners. We need to boost it, and if we already have some initial experience of such cooperation with some customs administrations. We exchange pictures, images. We even get information from some customs administrations about the movement of transportation vehicles and goods. We have worked with the Chinese with respect to the sharing of information about the customs price of certain goods and the movement. We would like to get information from more agencies, federal executive agencies. We have some initial experience working with information sources of major companies with which we successfully solve issues related to the accounting of foreign components and substances that are subject to recycling. We work with the representative offices of those companies in the Russian market, and I believe that we'll soon see the day when customs services become flexible, comfortable, client-oriented, quickly adjustable. But I think I should say that this is a two-way road, because we would also like to see some flexibility from our declarants, from our participants of the. I don't think I'm being too optimistic or overly optimistic. I believe that in the future, all violations by declarants or officials will always leave electronic tracks, and by using those electronic tracks, we will be able to take countermeasures. We have people here that work directly with the customs service. We have the CEO of the Mars company, who is also the coordinator of the consultative advisory board on foreign investment. So Valery Shapov, CEO of joint stock company Mars. As a representative of foreign business, Mars is a major manufacturer of foods for both people and pets. We have been in the Russian market for 26 years now. We work actively with the Federal Customs Service and the Federal Tax Service. And I would like to share what we hope to see, what we see now. And we see some progress. In fact, we have seen major progress. As I was getting ready for this event, my colleagues told me that with the introduction of electronic declaration, the clearance of goods has decreased by a factor of 6. With the introduction of electronic document management in Eurozec, the time of VAT redemption has shortened from 6 months to 1 month. But in order to be completely confident in the future, we need to solve some challenges, and I believe that the digital transformation is associated with certain challenges. Of course, the number of transactions between the business and the end user is growing. Also, we see a growth in the volume of transport trade. And the third challenge is the collection, storage, and processing of information. After all, we do not only want to collect it and store it, we need to do something with this information to extract insights that can be used to increase the competitiveness of our business and to increase the well-being, to deliver value for our customers. I'd like to ask the esteemed colleagues that there needs to be continued investment into physical and IT infrastructure, and especially into the capabilities and to the skills of our people that are necessary to operate this infrastructure. And second, equally important, is to harmonize and unify the processes and regulations. Regulating the interaction between the different stakeholders. Because now it turns out that we prepare electronic documents and then we are asked by another ministry or agency to print out those electronic documents, and our printers have to print away for days to print out all those documents. And the third is the availability of information. We've said that we've heard that there's a lot of information out there, it has to be stored, but as a business, we want to have access to this information in order to cut our costs and to produce not only what the customer, not only impose on the customer what we want to sell to the customer, but to produce what the customer wants. I believe that in the future, fruitful cooperation will help increase our competitiveness, especially if you are if you're a responsible taxpayer or a foreign company operating in Russia. Thank you very much. I believe that working with data is an asset that has to be used. And there is this form called tax monitoring. In fact, in other countries, you can provide preemptive data to decrease the risks related to regulatory checks. And by the way, I'd like to remind you that we have colleague, deputy head of the Australian Tax Authority, John Darda, also Chris Jordan, deputy chairman of the OECD Forum, who is related to digitization issues. John Darda is responsible for digital transformation, Chief Deputy Officer of the Australian Taxation Office. John, I know that there are bright examples of digitization, biometric services, and I heard that you work with voice for voice fingerprinting and so on.
Particularly thank you for organising the beautiful weather. I know you did that for us, so fantastic. Just some very quick background. Australia, we have 21 million individuals that interact with the system in some way, but we also have 7 million businesses that interact with the system in some way. And there's a lot of overlap between them because the individuals work in the businesses or represent the businesses. Our mission is to make sure that tax just happens. It should just happen because you do business or because you work or because you get paid, and tax should just happen underneath the covers. But to make sure we've got the trust of our citizens and our businesses, we want to make sure that they can see that it's happening, so that they know what their financial position looks like, what their affairs look like. And ideally, if we get it right, it won't be just that tax happens, it'll be the tax and welfare and other things automatically happen. So you shouldn't have to interact one way with the tax system and a different way with the welfare system. It should just all work together. Close to real time, not at the end of the year when you have to fix it all up, but through the year it should just work. To make that happen, there's a couple of really important things we're working on. So one of them is identity. If we want individuals to interact with us in a digital way, we must make sure that we protect their identity. And we want them to be able to control that identity. And so we're currently working on what digital identity will look like for individuals. And so a really simple example is if you want to enroll and work with the tax system, we're currently building a process where you'll be able to get your smartphone, you'll get your passport or your driver's license, you'll scan it. We will then take the information from those documents and check it back with a real document in the central registry to make sure that the document is real. As we're scanning it, we'll check the document to make sure the template is the correct.
Далее проверяем, действительно ли это все реально. И дальше мы просим вас повернуть камеру в направлении вашего лица, так чтобы можно было бы посмотреть, действительно ли ваше лицо соответствует фотографии на документах в нашей системе. То есть, если происходит соответствие, если мы видим, что вы живой, здоровый, что вы действительно вы, что это не какой-то самозванец, соответственно, мы получаем достаточно хорошее подтверждение. И по завершении этого процесса вы уже можете использовать ваш телефон в качестве механизма аутентификации. То есть в следующий раз, когда вы будете с нами взаимодействуете, садитесь за компьютер или за ваш iPad или за Smart TV включаете, и вы хотите, допустим, получить какую-то услугу, повзаимодействовать, вы идентифицируете через телефон, и дальше процесс идет очень легко. То есть вот это сейчас мы активно разрабатываем с тем, чтобы, опять-таки повторяю, чтобы люди могли полностью в цифровом режиме с нами взаимодействовать.
Слышно перевод, сказали вам сказать.
We office talk to everyone else's machines, the bank's machines, the business's machines, and it's not just that we want to suck the information in. More importantly for us is that we want to be able to push information out. So it's two-way. It's that people can talk to our machines in both directions. So for example, when somebody starts a job in a small business and they've got software that does the payroll, We want our machines to be able to tell that business everything they need to know for that person to have their tax affairs managed and the payroll. Similarly, when they do the payroll, we want to be able to see that information every payday. And so we're making big investments in how machines talk to machines, the security of that, the speed of that, and the amount of data that can be moved through those machines and stored in the different in the different spaces of those machines. They're big plays, they're big areas that we need to invest in to actually make the ecosystem work so the tax just happens. Thank you.
Да. Спасибо, Джон.
Thank you, John. We have Chris Sanger of Ernst & Young that's responsible for things related to taxation and digitization. Chris, you're deeply involved in digitization and so on and so forth. Ernst & Young, please. Chris, say a few words.
Very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'd just like to build on the comments that John was just making about digital identity, because if we think about what the opportunities are for the future, there's a real opportunity, I think, for tax administrations and government more generally in the area of digital identity, not just in the authorization that John was taking us through, but also making sure that that identity can be used once or held once by the individual and then to be used in many different applications, whether with businesses, whether with one part of government or throughout the whole of government. And I think if we look at where technology is taking us for the future, that digital identity, as I said, will be owned by the individual, will be portable, will be able to be used in multiple different places, will be able to be updated by the individual in real time, and will move from a period where identity was all about physical documents and was really difficult for for individuals or businesses to deal with, into something where it should be seamless. It should be into the kind of no-touch environment we're talking about digital, and about how this will change the whole shape of the way that taxpayers interact with tax authorities, with the wider government space, and actually creates an environment here where digital identity is behind the scenes, and it's enabling all the things that we want to achieve. Now, whether that's achieved through the type of blockchain technology that David was talking about before, or whether that's through other technology, we'll see as it develops. But I think really for tax authorities and for the future, this is one of those core enabling elements that will help us move technology through. So I think this is a great opportunity for us and something that we'll see develop as things go through. Thank you.
Спасибо, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. I'd also like to say a few words. Currently, only a few countries of the world have search engines, integrated search engines that are. This is Google for the United States, and Google, by the way, is not only used in the United States, it's used throughout the world as the biggest, as the major search engine. In Russia, we have Yandex. Yandex, in fact, started out as a search engine. Now it's a huge digital platform that brings together very different services. This is what creates a completely different picture for us. We use Yandex to order a taxi, to call in a taxi, to order some food from a restaurant. And Alisa, the voice assistant, digital voice assistant, is becoming more and more used. I'd like to present to you CEO of joint stock company Yandex, PhD in mathematics, and I'd like to say that in fact, working with big data, artificial intelligence, and other things are the things that are not only on the minds of companies like Yandex, but also of the Federal Tax Service. We generate a lot of data, and in fact, data is an asset. So, Yelena, can you share with us the plans of Yandex and how you interact with state authorities? Well, I listened to all the previous speakers, and I see that the almost all federal agencies are becoming IT companies, turning into IT companies, and IT companies are becoming closer to the physical world. They're becoming less of traditional IT companies. I visited some governmental agencies and specifically the Federal Tax Administration, and they are almost like Yandex, almost a full-fledged IT company. I'd like to share with you what plans we have and how we can cooperate. While before the business and the government were quite a long ways from each other, and filing tax returns was a very painful procedure, a lot of paperwork, a whole room full of paper. I remember those days. Now it's much easier. There is less room for an error. There is less paper to deal with, and it's all much more painless than before. And there are other services the government can provide, for example, exchange a passport, get a new passport issued, and so on and so forth. So things have become much hassle-free. People are becoming more happy with the government services. They don't need to stand in a queue, wait in a line. And a few words about the convergence between digital business and government agencies and services. Look, 5 years ago, Yandex provided jobs to whom? To project managers, designers, coders, programmers. Now Yandex employs not only these guys, but also other people, because this new service, Yandex Taxi, so that means we employ taxi drivers. Yandex Food delivery, well, that provides a lot of jobs for couriers and delivery guys. So we have also launched another service called Yandex Services. This is a platform that helps you find a professional, such as a tutor, a plumber. So well, this is not something traditional in terms of the tax service. So these are mostly self-employed people, and the fact that the tax authority simplifies the interface that self-employed people can use really simplifies their life. It really encourages people to set their foot on the path of self-employment. It's very convenient and good for us too, because all those who we employ, I don't only mean full-time employers, but those with whom we cooperate. This is all very good. We try to integrate more and more with the government agencies. I looked at the interfaces. These interfaces are tax return filing interface are extremely simple and easy to use. Everything is used, everything that's used by the tax administration is really cool, and I purposefully use this word because it's really good. And another thing that I would like to say is this. Let's say we have some physical service. Well, the tax administration, the federal tax service, used to be a purely physical service. It's very similar to Yandex. Yandex takes something from the physical world and tries to digitize it, make it a digital service. Colleagues have discussed 5 or 6 stages of digitization, but I will simplify things even further. There are 2 stages. First, at the first stage, you create an online interface, allowing people to interact with the service digitally. There is no machine learning at this stage because there is not enough data. Let's say, for example, the Federal Tax Service creates an interface that allows people to know what taxes to pay, what checks are paid, what checks are cached and so on. Well, at first, when we had only 100 taxes in the Yandex taxi service, we didn't have any machine learning or deep learning. So the first stage really simplifies things for the rank and file people. And the same thing happens everywhere. And then at stage 2, when there is enough data accumulated, you have to figure out what to do with this data. At this point, you can create something really smart. Machine learning is at the point where everybody is using it. Everybody is using it. You can use neural networks that are very good for classification, for information processing, and you can even go one step further. For example, the tax service sees the checks cashed around the country, who buys what goods, and you can create an algorithm to clusterize purchases. So you can clusterize the different purchases, the transactions, and you can derive anomalies. You can derive where the prices are too high, too low, and then you can create a bunch of different cool services. For example, showing the big differences in prices from region to region so that people can use it and buy things on the cheap. And there are also other examples such as Yandex Transport. For example, we show the predicted time of a trolleybus, for example. Arrival time for a trolleybus, the predicted time for a bus. We would be able to do it without the data that we take from the city transport administration. And you can create another scenario. We not only show that the trolleybus is coming, but we can show that the first car, let's say if we're talking about the metro, the first car is completely filled. So don't get in the first car. Get in the second car because it has fewer people in it, and you can create very different other scenarios, really good, great things. It all depends on the data. Of course, the government, I think, should be encouraged to share this data. And I'm not talking about sensitive data, but if it's open access data, then it should be shared. It should be shared, and it can be used for creating added value without violating the privacy of people. You can do all sorts of very useful predictions in a very futuristic scenario. Let's say we have driverless cars. In fact, we already have driverless cars, but they are not mainstream yet. But let's say let's say 5 years from now, these driverless cars become mainstream. They go mainstream. They're everywhere. Imagine that scenario. Can the business community accomplish this feat without the business community? Can the business community do it without the government? No. So I guess the government and business community has to join forces in order to accomplish this great feat. So the interaction between the business community and the government is of the essence. And everybody should be clear that even if it's a government service, it's still an IT company because you can't survive in the current world if you're not tech savvy, if you're not IT savvy. Well, that's my 2 cents on the matter. Thank you, Elena. I'd like to go back to what the previous speakers have said. So a platform is about cooperation of ideas. And it's about data that is used for predictive analytics. And another idea that I was really happy to hear is that there is a lot of data that the government has. It should share it. Is this neural networks? The neural network technology can be used for analyzing this data, generating insights, and useful predictions. So there should be a platform, common platform of cooperation between the government and the IT companies for the good of the people. And I would like to ask another colleague of ours, Daniel Korn of McKinsey. Daniel is an associate partner of McKinsey. He is very deeply engaged in tax matters. Daniel, please, you have the floor.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation to come and share a little bit of our learnings and insights from work that we do with multiple tax authorities. As it was mentioned before, I am part of the McKinsey service line dealing with public finance, working with tax authorities and custom authorities around the world. And I want to give you a bit of some of the insights and some of the experience that we've learned from how tax authorities are dealing with this changing world of more digital and more analytical work. So first of all, I would start the three relevant global forces that we see are affecting tax authorities today are, first of all, on a national level, on the budgetary level, there's usually a lot of pressure for governments to basically deliver more revenues, and tax authorities obviously are a major part of that. We believe that there's a big potential, a big opportunity with about $5 trillion of leakage, revenue leakage worldwide, and we believe from research and from our experience that there's an opportunity to bring back about $1 trillion of that. So $1 trillion opportunity, definitely something worth going after. It was mentioned here before, a lot of changes in technology from blockchain to additional data. We also see that there is 50% of the jobs that are about to be automated in the next few decades. So there's a lot of changes in the technology environment, which is definitely affecting tax authorities. And the last global relevant force, which I think was also mentioned before, is the rise of customer expectations. So we have today state-of-the-art private sector organizations that are creating higher expectations for taxpayers. I will talk about a few examples before. And our taxpayers, our citizens, are basically expecting the same from us, from our tax authorities. So how do we actually, what do different tax authorities do within this context is what I'm going to use the next few minutes to discuss. So first of all, just to illustrate on the point before, we believe that there's about $5 trillion of leakage in revenues, and we don't believe that it's all, it's a potential to be fully closed or fully covered, but we do believe that with changing the way tax authorities operate, either by better collaboration with outside parties or especially change in the actual business processes and operations, there is about an opportunity of $1 trillion lying here. Something to illustrate that and that helps us triangulate or calculate this number, we have looked at many organizations, private and public sector, and tried to find the link between or the correlation between their financial performance and their analytical performance. We have a survey or an assessment called Analytical Quotient, where we can rank different organizations based on their analytical maturity on different elements. And what we have done is that we have compared the leaders out of this survey compared to the other organizations that were assessed, and checked that against financial performance. We see revenue on the left, EBITDA on the right, and we see that there is a very strong correlations. The leading organizations are also better using analytics, or you can say that the organizations that are better using analytics are also leading on financial measures. So definitely a very relevant opportunity. A small word on the rising of customer experience. It was mentioned before the example of Uber as one of the private sector organizations that really disrupted the industry. And again, our citizens, our taxpayers are using Uber and are expecting the tax authority to have a similar level of service. We also see other examples that we see are Netflix, where the degree of personalization is outstanding today. Our taxpayers expect us to have the same degree of personalization. Amazon, with multiple value added, but specific example could be the one-click, a very swift payment. Taxpayers today expect to pay taxes with a single click. Some tax authorities are already doing it, especially in Northern Europe, but taxpayers all around the world are expecting that. And the last example is Domino's, where an organization that started as a brick and mortar, but today has created a multi-channel experience. And you can start ordering from certain channel and continue it in another channel, start online and use the call center and have a seamless experience. And again, our taxpayers are expecting the same from us. On the other hand, I think it's also an opportunity for many tax authorities. So Uber has basically also created a lot of transparency in an industry that in many countries was in the shadow. So today there's much more transparency and clarity. Personalization is actually also used by many tax authorities. When you want to talk about effective interventions, use of behavioral economics, it was mentioned before, one of the key elements is to have personalized messages would make it much more effective. Very seamless and easy to use tax declarations or tax submission, like in the Northern European countries with a one-click, would also make people more compliant and allow them to report more easily. And last, the seamless move between different channels is also something that has a lot of internal benefits for tax authorities in terms of how they run their service operations. So I would say the private sector is definitely leading or creating a path forward, which creates both a threat and an opportunity. Just to give you a last piece of context on this, we've surveyed 6 countries, and we've compared the level of satisfaction of citizens across different private sector industries and public sector. And what we see consistently when we measure the satisfaction, public sector organizations are still lagging, government are still lagging private sector. So there's definitely an opportunity, and I think some of the examples that were used here, I think the Australian example is a fantastic one, would definitely lead to closing of that gap. When we talk specifically about tax authorities, we see a varying degree of integration of analytics and automation within tax authorities. This research is based on more than 20 tax authorities that we have assessed on how much they use analytics in collections and in audit, and how much they use automation for internal processes and for service. And we see that there's variance. We see in collections, some organizations are still relatively using simple segmentation, not necessarily fully adapting the treatment and the type of interaction with taxpayers, while other tax authorities are much more advanced on that. On the degree of automation, we see again tax authorities have taken a big stance, some of them on, for example, data capture. How do you actually collect the data, do the initial assessment automatically? How do you support your auditors with all the tools to create as much automation in the audit process itself, all the way to the actual notification to taxpayers, which are also being automated. One of the reasons that we also see this variance is also a question of choice. So different organizations, different tax authorities have decided to move forward on service or on collections or on audit. So the message is we don't have one tax authority that is excelling on all elements. It's basically a matter of choice. This is why it's also interesting to try and learn from different organizations and different taxpayers, and then to prioritize it internally. A few quick examples of where we see practical examples of what tax authorities are doing. We look at the value chain of tax authority from audit to collections to talent management and to service. So most tax authorities are using today analytics within audit. Again, different levels of maturity, but case selection, risk profiling to really make sure that we're auditing the highest value taxpayers is extremely relevant. We also see many tax authorities that are today expanding the way that they interact with taxpayers, and they're not using just the classic audit coming and looking at everything, but using a more light touch approach of looking at specific issues. And more advanced topics could be social network analysis to try and identify links between entities, especially to identify wealthy individuals, or FATCA and CRS, which are dramatically increasing the level of information shared between tax authorities, creates also a big opportunity for tax authorities to use examples like natural language processes, which was mentioned before, to scan through those mountains of information. Within collections, we'll just quickly mention, we need to remember tax authorities actually do compete sometimes. Specifically within collections, tax authorities compete with banks. Many times we see tax authorities arriving to taxpayers, to corporates, to companies after the banks. And within collection, it's usually a matter of speed. And if we're not as good as the banks, they would probably be able to collect the money before the tax authorities. No joke. So what we see is many tax authorities are upping their game on the use of analytics to predict which companies they should go after with their collection operations and what is the adapted treatment per company. The third topic, again, it's also a kind of competition. So let's remember, tax authorities are revenue-generating organizations, but they're also just big organizations with big employers, with thousands and tens of thousands of employees. And the war for talent is a real war, especially with the more advanced roles today, like data engineers, data scientists. And what we see many organizations today are using analytics and digital ways to optimize the recruiting process, to really identify the best talent, to optimize employee motivation or the level of performance of employees. And tax authorities, again, here have to be on par with the leading organization if they want to make sure that they have the best talent. And last is about customer experience. Again, a topic that was mentioned before. Tax authorities today are compared to leading private sector organizations. And what tax authorities need to do is to really take a customer-centric approach in designing customer journeys from end to end. And again, I think the Australian example is spot on this topic. So this is just really a taste of what specific things tax authorities are doing. Just to conclude, I want to talk a little bit about what tax authorities need to consider going forward. How does it all come together? So I think we talked a lot about the bottom right corner, about the IT, the technology. Many tax authorities today have more access to data, more storage. But I think there's additional things that need to be considered, starting from talent. So I mentioned the war for talent. Data scientists today are in a shortage all around the world. Tax authorities are a public sector organization with its challenges. We need to find a way to manage the talent in a way that would allow us to stay competitive. And then on the left side, I think it starts with very strong leadership, sponsorship, and management from the top. This is the only way to really drive a digital change within the organization. And then the bottom left, which many times we deal with, is how you actually change your business processes, your operations, to really incorporate the analytics. Many times we see tax authorities that have, for example, an analytics unit that generates a list of cases for audit, but because it's not well integrated, the auditors are not properly using this list. There's no feedback loop back from the audit into the analytics department, what would allow a continuous improvement and a really optimized audit process. And from our experience, the only way to really succeed in those transformations is to create multidisciplinary teams that would really allow all the business to move forward on that element. And just to conclude, maybe 3 questions for leaders in the tax sphere today. I would say, are we really meeting our customer expectations, and what can we do more in order to increase that? The second question, are we really using analytics within our core functions, audit, collections, and are we really as good as banks, insurance company, and even beyond that? And maybe the last question, remember, are we actually using analytics also for additional areas within our organization? Talent management, for example, which is not the obvious example, but would still be a crucial element of our strategy. I would like to stop now. And
Спасибо, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. As a moderator, let me tackle some of the issues and challenges that you mentioned. And some of those challenges are fairly obvious, and many in the world think about how to assess the tax authority from the point of view of a client, what the clients expect from the tax authority, and what we ourselves believe is the digital maturity of our organization, the model of digital maturity of tax organizations. This is what we did with the OECD and with our service. We need to assess whether the technology, the data infrastructure is ready to be used for the tax authorities of the world. We made this model in such a way not to compare ourselves and not to boil it down to rankings, you know, this doing business ranking. In general, it does tell you about what's happening, but the efforts of countries and authorities are not noticed at all. The customs service worked really hard to get noticed so that the clients noticed what they were doing, and the same about the tax service. I'll be open with you, and we are public here. Your tax return, you can submit it in a few minutes, a few clicks. That's a very quick process, but for some reason, our colleagues from one of the distinguished banks who are involved in doing business, they give us 160 hours. And for some reason, I'm against trying to compete in rankings, but rather base it on the expectations of the clients and opinions of the clients. We have this low tax gap. I just spoke to David. I know that in England there's one of the smallest tax gaps for VAT. In Europe, it can be different from 10 to 15%, and 10 is the best amount. In the Russian Federation, it's under 1%. This is what we mean. It's under 1%. It's possible because now, after we got integrated with the tax customs services, after getting customs value information, we integrated that into the system, and we can see all invoices through the entire chain. And client-centered approach would be our next step. Online customs and tax administration that would allow us to be part of the natural part of life of taxpayers, to be sort of invisible, to reduce this admin pressure on our taxpayers. Why I discuss that in so much detail. Our last but not least presenter, Peter Green, is head of the Secretariat of the Forum on Tax Administration in the OECD. This Secretariat is involved in all the processes that have to do with tax administration. We are looking at many issues of customs administration because in many countries such authorities are one body. Peter, when we meet and talk during the forums where there are leaders of tax authorities in the world, we talk a lot about what's happening, but why don't you give us the overall analysis about what the tax and customs authorities do today in the world in terms of digitization, perhaps some look into the future about what's going to happen in the nearest future.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Mishustin. It's great to be here in Moscow again, and very fitting to be in a country to talk about digital transformation whose tax and customs administrations have done so much and are doing so much impressive work. I'd like to talk a little bit about the context around digital transformation and maybe explain why the OECD is doing such a lot of work in this area and the FTA. And it's not just an issue for tax and customs administrations. This also matters for public authorities as a whole. As we've heard, this is about the fundamental relationship between government and citizens. Just a few words on the FTA itself. It's a group of now 51 tax administrations covering all advanced and advanced emerging economies, represents most of global GDP. It's been a forum, very effective forum for sharing knowledge, information, collaborating, and I think becoming more so as we're entering the age of such fundamental change with digital transformation. I wanted to show you a few big numbers because I think this gives an impression of how big a business tax administration is, which the Commissioner referred to earlier, but also where there's tremendous scope for digital transformation to make such a difference. Now, this data comes from something we publish every couple of years called the Tax Administration Series, which is a comparative OECD series, about 1,000 data points. And I've just picked out here a few of the more impressive numbers. So I won't go through them all, but just a few. Collectively, the 51 tax administrations of the FTA bring in 8.5 trillion euros a year in revenue, which funds much of public services and government debt. Now, as a massive figure, any small change in that, a 1% change in that, up or down, can have huge implications for the citizens of all of our countries. Collectible tax debt, the third figure down here, so not just the overall tax debt, but the tax debt that administrations have judged is actually collectible. 800 billion euros across FTA countries. Now that's a massive number. Bring that in, again, a big difference to public revenues, public services, maybe even tax rates. But also that has big implications for the fairness of the tax system, that a lot of people aren't paying their fair share. Huge number of active personal income tax and corporate income tax players, masses of interaction with tax authorities. We haven't got the number here, but there's still a huge amount of paper in the system across tax administrations. So against that background, I just wanted to say a few words. It may sound banal, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the objectives of tax administration, because if you're considering digital transformation, you have to think very hard about why you're doing it. It's not cheap. There may be lots of dead ends, long investment cycles, so you need to know why you're doing it. Now, two main objectives of tax administration. One is obviously bringing in the money, so effective compliance. This is what funds public services. Say a massive amount brought in by the FTA administrations. The second objective is to do that in a way that doesn't create unnecessary and excessive burdens on taxpayers. Now, this is something that's not generally very well measured in countries, and it's very hard to get a handle in particular on the compliance impacts on small businesses. But it's for certain that this distorts activity. It takes a lot of time for businesses to deal with tax administration, and that time is time that's not spent on productive activity. So this matters for the economy. The next two, really important, but for different reasons. Efficient administration of the tax system. This is really goes together, I think, with good taxpayer services. One of the things that you sometimes hear, I used to work in a treasury, is the need to push down the cost of tax administration. And yet we're probably entering an age where actually you need to invest more in tax administration, because the total cost of tax administration across all of the FTA countries is less than 1% of the revenue that comes in. And as I say, we haven't measured compliance burdens very well, but that applies equally. And then on good taxpayer services, as has been said, this is an expectation of taxpayers, but it's not just something we're doing for the sake of it. I mean, first of all, we shouldn't just think about taxpayers as our customers. They're actually our owners, and the people who vote for the governments, and therefore the tax service belongs to them. But if we upset taxpayers, if they go away with unhappy experience, then that can have real impacts on tax compliance. Still, a tremendous amount of what we bring in relies on voluntary compliance by taxpayers, and that's never going to change. Taxpayers need to have good services, they need to feel confident, they need to trust the tax administration, and they need to think that the tax administration is working with the grain of them as individuals and as businesses. Lastly, what's changing in the tax environment? Well, just about everything. I've stolen a slide here from the Australian Tax Office. John, you may recognize this, but I won't go through it, but it just tries to set out the masses of things that are going on in the overall environment. Many of these may be transformational. Many of them may be dead ends. I mean, if you take something like blockchain, and I don't know how many conferences I've been to examining the prospects for blockchain, well, it may or may not turn out to be something that is transformational. But it is an area that we need to look at, that we need to think about, together with all of these other things. And this is where, because there are lots of roads you might go down that it might end up in dead ends, and there may be otherwise lots of reinventing of the wheel by different countries. This is where cooperation, collaboration by tax administrations and customs administrations is so crucial. One of the things we do need to bear in mind on digital transformation is that it is a journey. We're not suddenly going to jump to a brave new world where everything is done in a seamless way. This is a journey of a number of steps, and a number of steps that need to be made at the same time. Well-designed e-services, that a lot of progress going on that, but at the same time, you need to think about the strategic use of data. We have a lot of data coming in now. There's a lot of public concern about the use of data by all parts of government. We need to be able to communicate what we're doing with that data and make the most effective use through analytics, behavioral insights, and through being able to improve our services and improve compliance by use of that data. Part of the journey is joining up better, and that's both domestically, the kind of whole of government approaches, the way that the tax and customs administration is joining up so effectively in Russia, and internationally. So we've done that in a number of ways through the base erosion and profit shifting project, through the common reporting standard. But this is something as the world becomes increasingly global and as data becomes increasingly global. Data now can sit in any country, not necessarily within the country of the taxpayer. We need to make sure we're fully joining up. We need to make sure our systems are secure, that the data we're entrusted with is kept in a confidential and secure way. We need to think as well about how we move on what we call compliance by design, which has existed for a long time, and this will be true for many of you in the world of salaried employee taxation, where for many that we have a pay-as-you-earn system. Money is taken from your salary, and often people have very little interaction with the tax administration. Now that digital transformation allows us to think about how we might do more of that in other sectors of the economy, starting with micro and small businesses, but even potentially up to the largest business. The more we can get data, the more we can bring things together, the more that we can interact with business, with software developers. Maybe we can make tax something that's more a part of the taxpayers' natural systems, we therefore enhance compliance and simultaneously reduce compliance burdens. And finally, just the work that we're doing in the OECD FTA, where we've established a community of interest on digital transformation, which is led by Commissioner Mishustin. I know that the Customs Administration is playing a similar role globally in trying to bring together customs organizations. This is a really important forum. We have a number of these covering things like analytics, behavioral insights, human resources, but this is really central to what's going to happen to tax administration over the next few years. And it's where we will have the conversation about, well, what is our vision? What's the common thoughts of tax administrations on where we're going? Why are we doing that? What are the costs and benefits? How can we get a better understanding of that? And what are our priorities? And part of the work, I think, that will come out of this community of interest will be particular projects. We're doing a number already which are trying to share information, share understanding, allow people to avoid making mistakes as they undertake new reforms. So we've got one on online cash registers, which is led by the FTS, which has done really transformational work in this area. We've got something led by Australia on application program interfaces, as John said, about how the tax administration, business, and taxpayers talk to each other. And we've got something on commercial off-the-shelf software, which is exploring how you can make the jump from what are rather outdated legacy systems to having something that's more fit for purpose. These are only 3 examples, and there are many more areas where we will be wanting to explore what we can do in common. And part of this is collaboration. So as well as sharing knowledge, sharing understanding, we also want to work together increasingly on the common problems. One of these, just as an example, is around effective taxation of the sharing and gig economy. We've heard talk about Uber. Well, in many of the new online peer-to-peer platforms, the platform itself will be located in a different country to where the taxpayer is. And in a world where we're seeing increasing traces left behind electronically, which can be exchanged with tax administrations where that's domestic, becomes more difficult in the international environment, and therefore we need to think about how do we facilitate greater international exchange of information. We've made a start with the Common Reporting Standard, and a very important start, which shares information on accounts held in other financial accounts held in other countries. But this issue of data is going to be pervasive. We're going to see data held that's relevant to taxpayers of our countries held in other countries. And if we can't get that matters for tax compliance, and it matters for our ability to provide the most joined up, the most effective services for our taxpayers. So just in conclusion, going back to what I said at the beginning, the scale of all of this is enormous. The challenge is enormous, but it really matters tremendously that we work together and we get this right for growth, for our public services, and for our citizens and taxpayers. Thank you.
Спасибо, Питер.
Thank you, Peter. The OECD does a huge amount of work. Peter was able to explain that in just a few slides, but the collaboration of ideas and what we mean by exchanging best practices today is what gives us this opportunity, by measuring our digital maturity, to improve the operational efficiency of our services. Our time is nearing the end, and perhaps some people from the audience may want to ask questions. I will give you 30 seconds per question and 1 minute per answer. If there are any questions in the audience, please raise your hand. If we have no questions, there is a question. BKS Global Market. I am an investment bank on the one hand, so my first comment, I will continue the idea of IRENA. You do remind of an IT company in some components, the data that you collect together with the customer service can be monetized by providing paid services to the private sector and other economic agents. And many of them will be willing to pay for this data. And my second point is my question. I'm an owner of a small business together with my friend. It would be very helpful if we had a service when you would share data about green, yellow, and red sectors of your classification when you collect data for the company. When you are a small company, you may have hundreds of counterparts with whom you interact internationally and domestically, and you need your dossier for everyone. So what's your point? Please, that's more than 30 seconds already. All right. As soon as we make this kind of service, what will we do with companies like that? If we explain, if we tell everyone that this company has a red light without explaining anything, and we have hundreds and hundreds of factors that will impact the capitalization of your company, that's an issue, right? But the first step has been taken. Starting from January 1st, we're going to disclose data according to Article 102 of the tax code, and this data will be about your turnover, how much tax was paid, about the tax load, and the number of employees. That will already help you to get your things together. And then we have this service to check your counterpart. But you're doing you're talking about the obvious things that's going to be impacting the behavioral models. I want to hurt anybody in the process. Any more questions? Just get up and ask your question if you have any. All right. Since we don't have any questions in the audience, before we finish our panel discussion, I have a last question to all of our speakers here for 1 minute. In 10 years, how do you see your organization? It doesn't matter where you work, from the point of view of digital transformation. What will be at your organization in 10 years, maybe its main goals and tasks? If you can answer that in 1 minute. Who's ready?
As Accenture, we still see that taxes will be around in 10 years' time. They won't have gone away. But I think the nature of work will be different. We see artificial intelligence as having a really profound effect in terms of routine work. And we already see this. We already see the power of artificial intelligence to take away the routine service connections and the routine compliance connections, the routine correspondence, the routine telephone calls. They will be gone. That's different. And secondly, the kinds of skills that you will have in the agency will be different. Everybody will need to be a data person, not necessarily a data scientist in terms of a mathematician, but thinking about data and working on that basis. And that will be the nature and the core of the work of the agency, with all the associated need for decision making and agility and a different kind of culture in terms of change that comes with being a data-driven organization.
Спасибо. Tom?
Yeah, I see us really going down that path of sentient enterprise, becoming a sentient enterprise ourselves, right? And the way we operate, the way that we develop our software, that we have thousands of test and development systems that will actually feed data into a central repository. We automatically detect defects and automatically probably fix them even. But on the other hand, we also want to provide capabilities and tools and build out those platforms we talked about. So for our customers to take away the complexities of analytics today and really help them enable everybody in the company to actually work for the good.
Спасибо. Спасибо, Том. Владимир Иванович.
Ну, я, по-моему, в своем сообщении.
I think I already spoke a lot in my presentation about that, but my goals, our goals will remain the same. The custom service should be quick, convenient for the business, and reliable and safe and secure, protecting government interests from the point of view of the government's efficiency and security. Digitization is just a means of getting to those goals. On top of that, the number of feedbacks with our declarants, all those, we have to have more of those interactions that are transparent and quick. John?
Everything we're doing and dreaming about is about whole of government, so the identity system is about whole of government. We're building it for whole of government. So really it should be about us being part of an ecosystem, and that ecosystem has no paper forms, no electronic forms, data flows at the time of the event, and the payment associated with that data should go with the data at the time of the event. And ideally, we'd never have to chase returns, chase debt, or audits, because it just happens underneath the covers.
Лена, пожалуйста.
Ну, я себе представляю...
It won't change much, I mean, our company, but we want to bring people the services that are really useful to them in education and transportation, in their home environment, physically and virtually, depending on which way this life is going to go. But we want those services to be useful to people. At the same time, we want to offer them services that are based on cutting-edge technology and mathematics. I want mathematics to still be the main thing in our company.
One of the key points is the information gap between taxpayers and the tax authority, which is already closing today. So I think 10 years from now, there's going to be almost no information gap. Although the taxpayers have more and more information, I think tax authorities are today closing on that gap already. And that would probably allow to have a differentiated treatment per taxpayer, where today most tax authorities only audit a small percentage of taxpayers. The full set of taxpayers will be audited in differentiated ways.
Yeah, I agree with David. Sadly, tax will still be with us in 10 years' time, but it might be very different, and the OECD will still need to provide a forum for countries to discuss common standards to make sure that trade and growth investment can continue unfettered. The disruption will continue across all of the economy, though, and I think maybe the OECD as a whole will spend a lot more time thinking about the impact of the digital transformation on public services as a whole, as these things start to come together and all the synergies that are there, all the overlaps.
Спасибо. Ну, если говорить о налоговой службе.
If we talk about tax authority or the federal tax service, we want to be sort of invisible. We want to be part of the natural environment of taxpayers, so that those those payments that are lawfully due, this is something that you pay the bill. If you agree with that, you will do it quickly. And what we're doing now with the self-employed and so on. By the way, our tax for the self-employed individuals is not something new. It's a reduction of tax load and an attempt to create a convenient mechanism. Instead of 13% from physical private individuals to 6% for sole proprietors, make it even smaller, make it convenient and digitize it to reach the goals that we have. And this is what we are working on. In conclusion, let me say that today we discussed some breakthrough technologies that are changing the world, that are creating huge flows of information that we need to deal with. Yeah, the data is the gold of the 21st century, and it's undervalued by many currently. It's not easy to work with that. It changes our approach, our mentality, education. There are some excellent specialists in accountants, customs experts. They will all have to work with data as an asset. And this transformation today will become the way that we all need to follow. And accordingly, customs and tax authorities should become part of that natural process, be convenient partners for those who do not violate anything, avoid aggressive schemes of customs or tax planning, and at the same time guard the interests of the state if anybody violates the law. I'd like to thank all of you on behalf of all of us for being part of this panel, for being part of this discussion. Good luck, and perhaps we'll discuss sooner, but maybe in 10 years we'll have another discussion. Thank you.